Hello Cobras, in this video we're going to cover APA in-text and reference list citations. So we're going to look at the different elements you're going to need to put these together and certain ways to properly format them, obviously in text and also as a part of your reference list at the end of your paper. So moving ahead, let's kind of look at what APA is. APA stands for American Psychological Association. It is a citation style that is most commonly used for formatting manuscripts in the social sciences. And so APA is going to regulate different stylistics, in-text citations, and reference list citations. I would recommend checking out the APA online style guide. You can get there through apastyle.apa.org. It has a lot of really cool free PDFs that you can download. A lot of these PDFs work as checklists, so you can actually use it to check off different elements of citations as you're kind of putting them together. It's a really good way to know what you need to compile, how you need to compile it, how you kind of need to put all that information together. So if you forget anything in this video, or if you don't want to come back to this video and look at some of the information that I provide here, this is a great source. I'm also going to link another resource at the end of this to another citation guide website that I really love to use. I think it's really great. So stick around for that. Use that resource as well. You can also use us. So I'll also have ways that you can contact us and get the help you need if you run into any problems putting together your in-text citations or your reference list citations. So why is citing important? Citing is important because it allows you to give credit to an author for their words and ideas. Most importantly, it allows you to avoid plagiarism and follow basic copyright law as you're writing your papers. It also creates a bibliography, so readers of your work can conduct further reading and research on your topic or similar topics that they can then apply to their research, which is really great. It's a nice sharing community of research ideas and information. So the types of citations we're going to talk about in this guide are in-text citations, which can be broken down into parenthetical and narrative, and then also reference list citations, which are probably the types of citations you're more used to seeing. Kind of like if you're thinking of MLA, it would be like a works cited page. In this case, it's a reference list page. And we'll go over some different types and formatting for those types of citations. So how do you find the information you need for a lot of these citations? If we look at journal articles, there are a couple of different ways you can gather this information that's really easy. Normally on the first page of a PDF, if you're getting this from one of our online databases, or even just online in general, if you get a PDF for a journal article, it should have all of the information you need basically right there on the front page. So you'll have your title, you'll have your authors, you'll have the journal title, you'll have the volume number and issue number, you will have the date of publication, you will have your DOI, which is a digital object identifier, and we'll kind of cover that a little bit later. And you also have the page range for your article. Normally you can also find those down at the bottom, so you can just kind of go through and see what that page range is, but you have all of your information right there. That's all you need to create a functional and proper APA citation, whether it's in text or reference list. If you're in the database itself, you can find it usually in the catalog page. So this is when you actually click on an article into the database. It should bring you to this page here. This is from the Gale Academic 1 file. Some of the other databases may look a little bit different, but the front page, the first page you see, should contain basically all the same types of information. Again, you have your article title, you have your authors, you have your date of publication, you have your journal title, you have your publisher, you have your DOI, and you can get the page number information as you're kind of going through. You can also get that information from the cite option up at the top. Again, there's usually a cite option in a lot of different areas, and it'll give you most of the information you need as well. Again, as this disclaimer says, and I always like to say this as well, make sure you are still double checking everything with these auto-generated citations. Sometimes they're not formatted correctly, sometimes they don't contain the correct information, such as with this right here. Since there is a DOI option available for this, if you used this one citation specifically for a reference list, it would be incorrect. You would have to have the DOI and not the URL here, since the DOI is available. But some different things as well. Also, just make sure you're always consulting your professor. Sometimes professors like to use elements of past editions. Sometimes like to mix and match. They have every right to do so. So please make sure that you are checking with your professor in terms of the editions they're wanting to kind of focus on, they're wanting to use, or different elements they're wanting to use. We're going to focus on the updated 7th edition, but there are some variations, and I'll try to cover most of the variations as well. Some of the main ones anyway, as we go through the video. For books, books are pretty easy as well. They should have a title page near the beginning that gives you all the information you need there. Should give you the title of the book, edition information if that's there, the author of the book, publisher should be somewhere on that page as well, that title page area. If it's not, it should be in the copyright area. So a lot of this information, publisher, copyright information, you can get your publication date. Again, you also get your publisher here. And so you get all the information, again, you need to be able to create that proper in-text and that proper reference list citation in APA. So that's how you find the information. Now, how do you compile all the information? So now we're going to start looking at in-text citation variations. And there's quite a few. But the main thing you want to focus on here is that when you are putting any kind of information in, this goes for certain elements of in-text citations. It also goes for reference list citations. Always make sure you're inverting author names. Usually with in-text, you're wanting to use the last name, not really the first name. When you are doing titles, make sure you're using sentence case, which basically means you're only going to capitalize the first letter and then any proper nouns after that. After any colons, you will also capitalize the first letter, but then after that, unless there's a proper noun, everything else will be lowercase. So it's kind of some of the basic formatting you want to kind of follow as you go through both in-text and reference list citations for APA. And so if we move to the next slide here, we're going to start looking a little bit closer at in-text citations, and we're going to actually cover what a parenthetical and what a narrative citation is. So a parenthetical citation is going to be those citations that you put at the end of either a paraphrase or a quote, right? So these are kind of things that you're probably a little more used to seeing. So you would just paraphrase something from an article, directly quote something from an article, and you would put the author name, so it's going to be last name, comma, space, and then you're going to put the year of publication. And you're going to put those in parentheses, and the period is always going to come after your parenthetical citation for the in-text citation area there. Narrative citations are when you lead into a paraphrase or you lead into a quote. And so what you're doing is you're actually leading in with the author name already supplied in the actual narrative, in the actual piece of writing that you're doing. So in this case, you would have the author name as a part of what you're writing. So it wouldn't be a part of the parenthetical, but you would put the publication date in parentheses next to the author there in a narrative citation. And so that's kind of the way that looks. And we'll look at a few other examples here as we move forward. So in this case, this is going to be if you have page numbers that you also have to include. And so in this example, it's going to be another parenthetical citation, so it's going to come at the end. I'm also including multiple authors. So if you have multiple authors, you again will still use just the last names. And if it's two authors, like we have in this example, you will use an ampersand if it's in the parenthetical. If it's not in the parenthetical and you have multiple authors, and we'll see that in a second, I'll show you another example, you have to use the word and, not the ampersand. You only use the ampersand if it's within the parentheses here. And so you'll see here you have the last names, comma, space, publication date, comma, space. You'll have P. If it's only a singular page, you will have P, space, and then the page number. If it is a range of page numbers, then you would put two P's and a period, space, and then you would put the entire page range that you need to put in there. And you should see an example of that in a little while as well. And so an example of this with the pages for a narrative citation, so if you're leading with the author name, again, you would do very similar to what we saw before. You would put the last name of the author, you would have the publication date in parentheses, but you would put the page numbers at the end. So basically kind of treat the page numbers like a parenthetical citation. You put those at the end, and then you would have your period after the parentheses. And so that's kind of how those are going to be set up. If we look here, if you're introducing a quotation, again, normally you're wanting to kind of introduce it as a narrative in both cases, but you're wanting to introduce the quotation and not just have the quotation there. So you need to have some kind of introductory statement before kind of leading into the direct quote. But when you do have a direct quote, again, if it's a parenthetical situation, you're going to, again, put that at the end. So as we've seen before with all the parenthetical citations, you will have that at the end. For a narrative, you will have that at the beginning. And then again, if you have any page numbers, the page numbers will come after the quote. So, and you will also include the period after the parentheses. And so the only thing that's going to go in quotes here is going to be the quotation. You won't actually put the page number in there or any other elements within those quotations. Once that quote is done, the parentheses with any other information, whether it's all of the citation information or whether it's just the page numbers, that's going to go after the quotes, after the quotation marks. And so if we're looking at citing in-text citation works with multiple authors, again, if it's two authors and if it's a narrative citation, so if you're leading or if you're writing the author names into the actual information that you're putting before the paraphrase or before the quotation, then you will need to use the word and. So you'll have Hall and Oates, parentheses, publication date. If it's a parenthetical situation, as I showed you before, you will have an ampersand. So if it's information, if you're putting all of the information within the parentheses at the end of either the paraphrase or the direct quote, then you will use the ampersand. Again, if it's narrative, you will use the actual word and. If you're going to have citations, in-text citations for 3 or more authors, then you will use the word et al., which means and others. So one of the biggest things to make sure you're doing here is after the et, do not put a period. Some people will do that, and that is incorrect. The only time you will actually put a period at the end of et al. Is going to be after the al. Then you'll put the period there. But again, if you have multiple authors, what you will do is normally you will use the first listed author. And so you will use their last name, and then you will put et al., period, and then the publication date within parentheses. And this is for a narrative citation. If you're doing a parenthetical citation, then you do all of that within the parentheses. So you're just combining it all together. And basically the main difference here is that you will have a comma after the et al. Space 1965. And do make sure that you still put the period. So it's period, comma, space, and then the publication date for the parentheticals. And so if you're reciting a work with an unknown author, what you want to do is you want to use elements of the title. So you'll either, it's pretty easy if it's a narrative citation, because basically you're just going to lead into, so you can say according to, and then you can just put the entire title into the into the body of your work and into what you're writing. So it's a little bit easier to kind of reference it that way. You would use quotation marks if it's an article title or a chapter title. If you have to reference the book directly or the journal directly, then that's italicized without quotation marks. But if it's an article title, chapter title, you put that in quotation marks. And then you would include the date of publication in parentheses after that. If it's a parenthetical, what you want to do is you want to use somewhere around 1 to 2 words of the title, no more than 3. Normally you can just do 1. You can just do 1 here. So just use the first word of the title, put that in quotation marks, put your comma, and then put your date of publication after that. And then basically it's just going to allow any reader who's actually looking at that, they can look at the reference list. Again, if there's no author listed, the author is not going to be in the reference list citation. So all they have to do is just look through your reference list, find the title that begins with that word, and they'll know what to go look for if they need to go look for any other extra information from the article that you're citing or from the information that you're providing. And finally, if you have a group author, so like an organization, there's a couple of different things you need to do there. If it's a narrative citation, when you are first citing the group, you need to write the entire name of the group. After that, within the parenthetical, you can put the abbreviation if it's a well-known abbreviation. And so that way, any other time that you mention or reference that organization, you can now just use the abbreviation instead of having to write it all out. But you have to make sure that you write out the entire name of the organization the first time. In a parenthetical, it's the same thing. Slightly different formatting. What you'll do is you will put the entire name of the organization, and then in brackets next to it, you'll put the abbreviation, and then you will put your comma and your publication date. Same thing applies to the parenthetical as it does the narrative. Any other time that you now do a parenthetical citation for that organization in your paper, you can now just put the abbreviation, and you don't have to write the entire organization name. But you do have to at least do it the first time. So always make sure you are writing out the entire name the first time, then the abbreviation after. So now we're going to move to reference list citations. So these are going to be the probably more common forms of citations that you would see, again, at the end. So in the bibliographies and the works cited and the reference lists, this is what that's going to look like. Most of the essential information you're going to need for citing books is going to be author or author names, date of publication, title, publisher. There's some other information that you may need in case some of this first set of information is absent. So you may need editors, you may need translators, you may need edition numbers, and you may need DOIs. DOI would probably not really apply that much to a lot of books. They are starting to apply DOIs to a lot of books, especially ebooks. But for the most part, this is probably not going to be found in relation to books. And if it's not, that's totally fine. You leave it off. But with the revised 7th edition, now that they are starting to apply DOIs to more books and more ebooks, it's now a part of the citation guidelines. So if you're building a book citation for a reference list, the basic format is going to look like this. So you will have the last name and initials of the first name. So you won't actually write the first name. You'll just use the initials. So if they have a first name and a middle name listed, you'll put the initials for each one of those. And you'll see examples, such as down here, as to how that should look. Then it will be a period. You will have your publication date in parentheses, period. You will then put the book title, and again, the book title will be in sentence case. There'll be a period, space, publisher name. All you have to do is put the publisher now. In the 6th edition, you used to have to also include the publication location. In this case, you don't have to do that. In the 7th edition, it's been revised, so all you have to do is just put the publisher name. So that's all you need here. You don't actually have to have the location. So let's say you were looking at New York University Press. That's all you have to put. You don't have to actually put New York beforehand and then have the actual publisher. So it's a little more streamlined now, which I like. And then the DOI, if it's available. Again, as I said, most cases it's probably not going to be, but if it is, you do need to include it. And then below here is an example of a very basic format for book citations. Again, here you see the last name, comma, first name initial, publication date in parentheses. You have the name, the title of the book, and again, the only things that are capitalized are proper nouns, and everything else is going to be lowercase. If there are any elements in the title, such as quotation marks, you do need to retain those, but you don't have to put quotation marks any other time, for titles at least. Titles are just only to be italicized. You do not put quotation marks around titles. But again, if there are elements within the title that contain quotation marks, you do need to put those. And so I wanted to use this example to kind of show that. So you do want to retain at least some of that information. And then the publisher information. There was no DOI for this book, so you don't put anything there, and that's it. And always make sure that you are using a hanging indentation for every line after the first line of a reference list citation. That's extremely important. That needs to be done. Has to be. No other way around it. It's part of the formatting. Yeah, you got to do it. So always make sure you have that hanging indentation. If it's an edited book with no author, basically what you're going to do is you're going to treat the authors or the editors as the authors. And so you will put them at the beginning in place of the author name. So in this case, we have two editors for this book. And so we have last name, comma, first name initial. And when you have two like this, you will want to use the ampersand. You don't use the word and to connect the two names. And you will put the second listed author. You will put EDS, make sure that the E is capitalized. Why that's important is because when you are referencing an edition, you use the exact same kind of abbreviation here, but it's a lowercase e instead. So always make sure you use, if you're referencing editors, you use an uppercase E in that. So you would put that there. Then you would have your publication publication year, and then you would put the title. Another thing I wanted to show here as well is that if there are any kind of weird capitalizations or unique capitalizations within the actual title, you do want to retain that. So in this case, this K was capitalized. You do want to retain that. Again, the first letter you'll lowercase, and then anything after, any word after the colon, you'll do that. That'll also be uppercase, and then everything else will be lowercase after that. And then publisher information here, and that's it. There was no DOI for this book either, so you're not going to put that in there. And so that's an example of an edited book with no author. If we look at edited books with authors, so this is an edited book that also contains an author, you would start it off the same way you would anything else if you have an author. So you would put the author name, the publication year, the title, and then what you would do is you would include the editor name after the title. So after the title's done, in parentheses, you would list out the editor name, but you would list it out first name, middle name, last name. So you don't invert it within the parentheses here. So in this case, it would be first name initial, period, middle name initial, period, and then last name, comma, editor. So, and if there are multiple editors, then you would list all the different names here. But in this case, this is the way this is going to look for an editor in a book that does have an overall kind of author. And then you would have your publisher information after that. So in addition, other than the first, so if you have, let's say, a second edition of a book, this is how you will put that into the book. This is why it's really important also to make sure that you are using the lowercase e for editions, uppercase E for editors, because let's say you ran into an instance where maybe this book also had an editor. Then the editor information would come basically right here with the edition information, and so it could be a little confusing if you don't have the proper punctuation and the proper capitalization and stuff within these citations with this type of reference list citation. And so with this one, again, formatted very similarly, you have your author, publication year, book title, and then you would put the edition number here, always set it up this way, and then you would have your publisher name there. And so an article or a chapter from a book, one of the biggest differences with APA from MLA is that you do not put quotation marks around chapter names or article names. you just leave them as they are. They're not italicized. You just write them out. And so in this example, you would have your author name, publication year. This is the chapter name. And so this is the way you would write it. Again, all in sentence case. So the only thing that's capitalized is that first word or proper nouns. Period. And then you would have the book title. Then you would have your page range. This is the page range for that chapter. And again, you will use 2 P's if you have a page range. If it's just one page, you only use 1 P. And then after the page range, you put your publisher name. So now let's look at article reference lists. This is going to be like journal articles, magazine articles, newspaper articles, and this is going to be how they are formatted for a reference list citation. So very similar information as with the books. The only difference is you're going to also need to have article titles, journal titles. You're going to have the volume number, issue number, and in most cases you are going to have pages associated with this, so page ranges or specific pages. And the other information, if applicable, I put if applicable with the DOI because sometimes with older articles, we're still not seeing DOIs. They're doing a lot better with it now where you usually do see it. But for the most part, you're always going to find a DOI with a lot of online articles now. But one of the biggest examples of when you will not will be if you're using a website article. So in that case, you will use a URL. And again, also, if an article happens to not have a DOI, then that's when you will use a stable URL, which is different than the URL that you pull from the browser. A stable URL is usually called a permanent link, and you will usually find those links in the databases somewhere. You usually see somewhere where it'll say link or link to article or permanent link. And that's the link you want to use. Normally you want to use that because with database articles, especially if you're getting them from purchased databases such as from our library, the URLs in the browsers are session based. So once you actually end the session and you leave, that URL is then useless. It actually won't take you back to anything. Normally, some databases, it's okay. It'll still take you back. But I know, such as EBSCO databases, normally the browser URLs do not function after you actually end your session. So you really need to make sure that you have the permanent link to guarantee that you get back to that specific article. So it's always really important to get that. It's always really important just to email information to yourself, or as you're looking at articles, just go ahead and jot down information. It just saves a lot of headache afterward. And so if we move forward, an article from an electronic journal, this is kind of the basic formatting for that. So you're going to have your authors kind of listed, and always make sure that when you are listing your authors, you are listing them in the same order they are listed on the in the actual article itself. So however they are listed, the order they are listed in that article, you order that the exact same way in the reference list citation. So you don't do it by alphabetical order or anything within here. The only time you have to worry about alphabetical order is when you are actually putting your reference list together. Then you have to worry about that. But at least within the citation itself, you put them as they are listed in the actual article. And then after, if you have multiple here, before you list your last author name, you will always use an ampersand before. Don't use the word and. Use the ampersand. Then you will have your year of publication. You have your title of the article. Again, no quotations, and it will be written in sentence case. And then you will have your journal title, periodical title, if it's a magazine or a newspaper, and it will be in italics. You will continue the italics into the volume number, and that's very important. Some folks will not do that. That's somewhere they'll kind of mess this up a little bit. But the italics, you will continue into the volume number. Again, you will have a comma after the journal title. And then you will put the issue number in parentheses. Make sure you do not put a space between the volume number and the issue number. That's not a mistake. You actually do just flush them together. So you do not space after the volume number. You'll put your issue number there. You'll put your comma. You will then put your pages, and then you will have your DOI or URL afterward. This is an example of what this will look like. Here are the two author names. Here's the publication date. Here is the article title. Again, everything is in sentence case except for the first letter of the word after the colon and also the first letter of the actual article title itself. You'll have your period, and then you will have your journal title. That'll be in italics. Comma is also in italics. Space. Volume number is in italics. And then you'll have your issue number in parentheses flush against the volume number. So again, no space in between there. And you'll have a comma, space, and then you will have your pages. Again, one of the biggest differences here is that you will not put a P or two P's in front of the page ranges for a journal article. So if it's a journal article, website article, again, magazine article, newspaper article, it's any kind of article from a periodical of any form, in your reference list citations, you do not put the P's in front of your pages. You just put the page numbers. You put the period there, and then you will list your either the DOI, you will list it in its entirety. It does need to be linked. It's one of the things for the editions. Again, sometimes professors are a bit lenient with this. Again, consult your professor. Find out if they want it to be 100% linked or if they just want the information there. Sometimes professors are okay if you just, as long as you have the information there where they can copy and paste, it's fine. But at least in the 7th edition, it does say that this information does need to be linked. It does need to be clickable. It does need to actually take you to the article itself. So that's why it is hyperlinked here. But again, that's at the discretion of your professor. So moving on to a magazine or newspaper, these are going to be a couple of examples of what this looks like. They're formatted a little bit differently. One of the biggest differences, at least with the magazine and the newspaper articles, are with the publication dates. You also need to put the months. So you will have the year, comma, and then you will put the month. In this case, it's has 2 months on it, so you would put those 2 months together within the parentheses. With newspapers, you will also want to include the day, since those are usually daily and not just monthly. So in that case, you would put your year, comma, month, space, and then the date. You put those in the parentheses after the author names. Then you would have your article title. You would have your magazine title or newspaper title or news site title. Then you would have your volume and issue number. Again, with the magazines, volume is italicized, issue is in parentheses, flush against, period, and then you would have your page ranges again without putting the P or double P's in front of that. In this case, there was no DOI for this magazine example. There also was no URL for this magazine example, so those aren't included here. And then for a newspaper example, you have the same thing here. So you have your author name, all the date information, title, newspaper name, newspaper title, comma. Biggest difference here is because newspapers are paged slightly different, you will have slightly different page numbers or page number identifiers. And so you'll want to make sure you follow those exactly with whatever the newspaper is that you got it from. And you can usually find this information again on the newspaper pages for the PDFs that you pull from any kind of journals. If you pull any kind of newspaper articles from a database, it should have this type of page number information, again, somewhere on that catalog page or somewhere in the citation information that you can pull from the database. Finally, articles from a website. Again, the formatting is pretty similar to newspapers, basically. So you're going to kind of follow the same type of guidelines for newspaper reference list citations. And so here's an example here of a website article. Here's your author. Here's the publication date information. Again, it's going to be year, month, day. And then you are going to have the title of the page. One of the biggest differences here between the magazines and the newspapers and website is that you are going to italicize the entire title, right? So the title gets italicized. The actual website does not. So it's a little weird. It's a little backwards. But that's the way the formatting is for websites anyway. And again, if a website or if any kind of title does contain quotations within that title, you do need to retain that. But again, you're not going to put quotation marks around the entire title in general, right? But if the title has those, you need to retain them, keep them in the title. And then everything is, again, in lowercase except for proper nouns and the first letters after a colon or the first letter of the title itself. And then after you put the title, you'll put the website name there. Again, not italicized. Just throw that in there. And then you will include the URL. And again, it has to be the entire URL. It has to be clickable. Needs to be functional. Needs to be hyperlinked. Then you will put that at the end after title there. You don't put periods either. I forgot to mention that before. With the DOIs or the hyperlinks, you do not put periods after those. You just leave them as they are. And so that's going to cover it. That's it. Again, this isn't fully extensive. There's still a lot of other variations that you can kind of go through, but what I wanted to do is choose some of the ones that I think you'll run into the most, or more frequently at least, when you're looking at different citation types and trying to gather different information for different citation types. So hopefully this is useful. Again, if you are actually in the process of writing your papers and putting in citations, whether they're in text or they are referenceless citations, and you need a little extra help, please do not hesitate to contact your librarians. You can either send an email to reference@coker.edu, or you can send an email directly to me. My name is Jonathan Guerin, and you can send it to jguerin@coker.edu. I'll be more than happy to respond and set up an individual one-on-one appointment with you to hopefully work these citations out and figure them out and make them look all nice and pretty and neat for you. One of the other resources that I highly recommend is the Purdue OWL. I pull a lot of the examples and a lot of the formatting types from that. I use that extensively when I was a college student. Still use it now for any of my personal research. It's just a really great resource. They do a really good job of breaking down all the different citations, all the different citation types, all the different formatting. So highly recommend going there and checking out their APA guide section. And then once again, if all else fails, always go to the OG tried and true publication manual for APA. We do have the 7th edition, a copy of the 7th edition at the library. Then again, you can also view a lot of the information that I covered here and a little bit more on their online style guide here, and highly recommend checking that out. And yeah, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for viewing the video, and I hope it was helpful. And yeah, thanks. Go Cobras.